Good morning, gentlemen.
Morning.
The revenue commissioners and their inspectors had certainly found someone to blame when they sat down in January 1992 with top brass from the Bank of Ireland. The agenda concerned a small town in the Midwest, Milltown Malbay in County Clare.
Complete.
The revenue had discovered that the local branch of the Bank of Ireland held a good number of substantial bogus non-resident accounts held by prominent businessmen then trading from various premises in the town. The penalties and interest exacted were severe. The revenue had also established that bank staff were responsible for the bogus accounts being there. It was a little honeypot of tax evasion, not at all untypical of many an Irish provincial town, except that here the upstanding citizens got caught.
We examined a lot of taxpayers' files going back over a long period, going back over 4 or 5 years. We weeded them out and we went and spoke to them, and they admitted to delinquency. It was claimed very much by the depositors that they had been incited by the banks, encouraged by the banks. The information we were given at that time was that they were solicited by different bank managers.
One of the managers had even taken some accounts with him on his transfer to Limerick. 2 Bank of Ireland staff received significant fines from their superiors for being in breach of bank instructions.
And do you have a ballpark figure?
At the summit in Dublin, Bank of Ireland offered £200,000 in settlement of the tax arrears. Revenue accepted it. But under the 86 Finance Act, the Revenue could have demanded to inspect all non-resident declarations account holders have to sign. Although this power was sought by the tax inspector, Revenue decided not to use it, despite being aware of serious nationwide abuse. And so Milltown Malbay came to look not like success, but as evidence of Revenue's allegedly craven approach to a national scandal. Members of the Public Accounts Committee have made it clear that so far they are more or less mystified at the Revenue's attitude towards policing bogus accounts. They're literally finding it hard to understand how Revenue could have acted as it did. Even more than with the Bank of Ireland, Revenue's treatment of AIB has raised eyebrows.
I was kidding, right? Exactly.
In 1990, Tax Inspector D.A. McCarthy was hunting down bogus non-resident accounts in AIB branches such as Templemore in County Tipperary and in the North Dublin town of Skerries. When AIB insisted that there had been no wrongdoing, McCarthy's findings led him to write to AIB headquarters. He accused them of knowingly condoning the abuse of the non-resident procedures. The meeting which followed in Revenue headquarters has triggered one of the most astonishing aspects of the dirt controversy. This is a complete clash between Revenue and the bank over what happened at the meeting. Revenue say it was misled by the bank. AIB say that the Revenue inspectors offered them an unauthorized tax amnesty for bogus accounts. This fierce public contest between 2 of the state's heavyweights has further embarrassed both Revenue and the bank. And it's this man and his correspondence which has left AIB red-faced. He's Tony Spollen, the bank's own former internal auditor. Spollen has let the cat out of the bag in his comments on AIB's bogus non-resident accounts problem. These comments at the same time in 1991 as the bank was telling Revenue things were in order.
The figures used by Jimmy O'Mahony, he said he wanted to get the attention of the organisation.
So he inflated the figures
for attention.
attention.
Figure up to a level out the roof. He didn't have a clue, he still doesn't have a clue.
The bank has sought since to rubbish the reported views of their own top staff. But what is most embarrassing for the Revenue regarding this February 1991 meeting are the bank's claims that they were effectively told they would not be liable for perhaps many millions of unpaid dirt tax arrears. A letter from a senior inspector 2 days later spoke of a negotiated payment without penalties or publication. AIB have said an amnesty was confirmed later by phone.
In a telephone discussion on the 5th of March 1991 with the then Group Taxation Manager of AIB, the Senior Revenue Inspector stated that he viewed the arrangement, and I quote, amnesty, unquote, up to the 30th of June 1991.
Internal notes within AIB seem to confirm at least that senior staff believed they had an amnesty.
That there's a notice crystal clear.
The note is crystal clear.
Yeah, but I have no recollection of it and would strongly dispute its contents.
I have no doubt in my mind that there was any suggestion about a tax deal. Neither was there any suggestion as to a waiver of tax for any period of tax, any period in relation to tax. And as I say, if there was any suggestion or even any indication of it about an amnesty, I would have recorded it.
Whatever the truth of this, and despite stern revenue denials, the impression has gone abroad that revenue knowingly turned a blind eye to substantial tax arrears owing from AIB.
It was a nod and a wink arrangement because nothing would be committed or could be committed to paper on it.
The revenue knew what they were doing?
Yes.
Kieran Ryan represents the bank managers and other officials, and while he may or may not be right about the supposed deal with AIB, he has been perfectly placed to know the full dimensions of the bogus accounts issue. He says the figure of 53,000 is far short of the total.
One could be talking about 3 to 4 times that figure, up to 200,000 of these accounts.
Ryan also knows well the pressures that come on bank managers such as those in Milltown Malbay.
If somebody goes in with £50,000 into X bank and say, if you don't take this from me in a non-resident account, I go down the road and somebody else will. And in those circumstances, with those pressures, and with the climate which was there, with the worst kept secret of the banking industry, people virtually had to take these accounts. Because if they didn't, they'd go down the road, or else the money would go out of the country.
So there was complicity within the bank staffs with the people who are opening these fraudulent accounts?
Well, complicity, you know, is a word that has certain connotations, but I would believe that people at local level and local managers did open these accounts. It's a matter of record that they did.
And headquarters knew?
Oh, absolutely.
And revenue knew?
I believe without doubt they did. Or if they didn't, they should have.
So everyone knew, actually. Is that what you're saying?
Yes.
So why did it continue? Why did this cancer, to quote Mr. Mulcahy's word, develop in the course of the 1980s?
Well, all I can say is it did, and it developed because of the climate at that time.
Today, the revenue is being heavily challenged for its failure to use its power to inspect non-resident declarations. We saw that this power was not used after Milltown Malbay blew up. Indeed, it was never used before 1998. But revenue insists that real power was cut off from them when the dirt tax came in.
Dirt tax was introduced in 1986, and it was introduced at that time to deal with a disparity that arose between the treatment of the building societies and the banks for tax disclosure purposes.
Prior to 86, the banks had to disclose interest payments above a certain level to the revenue. They resented this and lobbied hard for the same non-disclosure as the building societies had. The revenue fought this, but the banks had their way over them. 3 days before the government decided to extend non-disclosure to the banks, the revenue made its views known. In a letter to the government, the revenue said that the extension of non-disclosure to the banks, as per the proposed dirt tax, would deal their efforts against tax evasion a crippling blow. It would become a charter for tax evasion. It was the revenue putting down a marker. 3 days later, the government ignored their views, and so we had the dirt tax.
The building societies have made it absolutely clear that they would oppose at all levels any attempt to have disclosure of their accounts, even on the same basis as the banks have had it done. And it appears that the government decided that we have the lowest common denominator. We'd have the building society composite tax rate without the disclosure provisions that had applied to banks previously.
It's interesting that the dirt tax was also opposed by the Department of Finance. Dirt pulled the shutters down on access to bank interest payments. The revenue said that this was the only power, along with access to accounts, that would allow them to combat tax evasion in a serious manner.
There's a huge